So, I am seeing around the fandom that though they are kind of inaccessible, there is a lot of interest in the Winx comics. And there's been a lot of official activity around the comics of late, and by of late I do mean last year. I've been wanting to cover all the comic news, but I kept not doing it because I didn't have anything clever to say. But you know what? I do not need to be clever. It's my channel, I can talk about the Winx comics for 20 minutes if I want to, even if the news are extremely stale. So in this video, I'm going to be covering what's going on with the Winx magazine, what's going on with the Papercutz volumes, and my thoughts on the upcoming Fate graphic novel. Nobody asked for this? Let's start. I guess we should start with a recap of the basics. The Winx comics have existed as long as the franchise has, and were originally meant to come out before the show in 2003. Delays meant that the first issue of the comic didn't come out until April of 2004, but they have been going strong ever since. The first 12 issues of the comics were mostly a recap of the first season, with some minor but cumulatively significant changes. And from issues 13 through to about issue 90 of the comics, the canon diverged, and sometimes quite radically. I say around issue 90 because Adventure on Zenith is I think where we see the first major retcon, which is that Tecna, who was up until this point the princess of the planet Titania in the comics, stops being a princess and is instead from Zenith, like in the show. This correlates more or less with the moment where Viacom became a co-owner of the studio, and as we know, this led to the soft reboot of the show in collaboration with Nickelodeon. At this point, the comics themselves seem to go through a soft reboot, and I think that though a lot of the same artists and editors were still in the picture, the comics, at least for me, lose a bit of their old charm in the process of bringing them more in line with the show. Although that may very well be nostalgia talking, and you should boo at me if you think I'm wrong. The magazine is still going, and has been continuing in the Season 8 art style. And these are easy to dismiss, but there are some nice stories here, even though the more juvenile style of the art is going to be a barrier for older fans, and inevitably so. It is also worth noting that despite coming out recently, they do not address certain concerns brought up by fans within this art style. It's been 5 years, seriously. However, in a fan-pleasing turn of events, issue 236 of the comics this year returned to a style closer to the original, in celebration of the 20th anniversary of the Winx Club, and February and March are continuing with this nostalgic return to form. But if you do not pick up the magazines as they come out, it's hard to keep up with the comics. There are online archivists who do great work, but within the fandom, especially on the Anglophone side, the comics do not have a lot of visibility. Historically, the place to read the Winx comics in English has been the Viz Media Magic collection and the actual original volumes that it collects. This collection is from the Nickelodeon era, but I think there are still a few places where you may pick them up. Interestingly, the Magic collection changes the order of the stories whilst covering Season 1, and only contains 8 of the first 12 in the first 4 volumes, which I don't think is a horrible change. It gets the job done in terms of introducing the characters and the world. And then there are the next 5 volumes with stories from up to Season 4, with some personal favourites of mine like Magix on Ice, Robot Rebellion, and Kirill's Exam, which is about Roxy's Althea roommate. Actually, at some point I'd like to cover what post-Season 4 comics imply about whether Roxy was truly ever intended to join the Winx Club. That being said, I really do feel that the comics need some continuous, in-order release. Some of the best, most detailed storylines are buried deep into the run of the comics, like the war on Heraklion, Musa's Enterprise, and her background relationship with the composer Sibelius, the Tricks not as enemies of the Winx but competitive rivals. Of course, there are individual very good stories that really can be read as one-offs, but reading them in context is insightful. You see what themes were in the minds of the creators across a particular run. Sometimes we can even glean insights into ideas being thrown around in the production of the show. And it looks like this call may be answered. So, as you may know, Papercutz under Mad Cave Studios is now slowly in the process of putting out translations of the old Winx comics. A limited edition copy of the first volume was first available last autumn at the New York Comic Con, and this January the mass market version was published. It compiles the first 3 original issues, Bloom's Discovery, Secrets of Althea, and The Boys from Red Fountain. And the second volume, Friends, Monsters and Witches, and the third, Heart of a Fairy, are available for pre-order, and I guess we can assume that they will continue with the next 6 stories. My reaction to this was both really pleased that the comics will perhaps finally get their due, and frustrated on a more personal level, because we have had the first few issues published physically multiple times, recently even. The Viz Media collection has these issues, the French hardbacks already went up to issue 20, the fairly recent Italian Mondadori collection has these issues. God, I am so bored of these issues. And I guess, as per what I said, I can't be mad that they are publishing them in order. The Winx comics really are meant to be read in order. But also, this has me worried. A lot of people pick up the first couple of issues of the Winx comics and then decide that they are not worth their time because, as I said, the first 12 issues are more or less a retelling of the first season of the Winx Club. I've seen reviewers dismiss them as part of the franchise simply because they've only looked at the first issue. I've already seen reviews on these comics to that effect, and it doesn't bode well. I don't know what other way they could have gone about this, because you do want to introduce the characters and concept properly to a potentially new audience, which is what these early issues were intended for, but in the meantime you're losing the attention of the main fan base, who maybe don't realize that the comics will eventually diverge and be basically independent. But I would just like to say, if you are invested in getting to know the comics, the early issues are still worth reading. Some of the ways plot points happen are different, their powers are introduced in different ways. In issue 9, Bloom gets a part-time job at the White Horse Bar in Magix, which is a pretty important location in the comics. Additionally, Aisha and the Pixies, for example, are first introduced in issue 12, which was originally released in March 2005, before she was officially introduced on the show. So the comics were an important part of the brand, and there was thought put into their content in terms of Rainbow's vision for the franchise. I'm also going to whinge a little more and say I wish the covers were more interesting. The Winx comics had really cool covers. I hope to see more use of them, perhaps even in merch. But all of that said, I guess I should put my money where my mouth is and still pick up the first 3 volumes. You know, support capitalism. Because ultimately, the fewer copies the earlier volumes sell, the less likely we are to get the later issues that I really want to see and own as hard copies. Even amongst the earlier issues, I have my favorites like issue 15, Land of the Dragons, featuring Diasporo, or issue 13, Moonlight, with werewolves and flora love interests. It's also pleasing that they do seem to be coming out fairly quickly, January, June, November, so already next year we're going to start seeing original stories. But the reality is that the fandom may not actually pick up the first 4 volumes of this series, which can very much spell death for this project, and you really can't blame them for that. But speaking of different ways to present the comics, also last autumn at a different Comic-Con, Look at Comics and Games, 3 limited edition volumes of the comics were released, which are now available for purchase on Winx Club shop. All of them are in Italian. Each volume collects 3 issues from the original run of the comics. Hallowinx collects 3 of the 4 Hallowinx comics, the 3 original ones that were used to promote the Halloween stores. I've talked a lot about how weird Monster Mission was in terms of brand integrity and recognition on this channel, so I guess this is like a fun little artifact of a weird moment in Winxology. Winx vs. Trix collects Lost Words, Pandora's Box, and Infernal Concoction. Infernal Concoction is universally loved. It's a don't do drugs kids story, but in a really charming way. Pandora's Box is about the Winx and the Trix going to an all-boys magic school as exchange students. And Lost Words is kind of like a retrieve object quest, the Winx going place to place looking for ingredients for a potion. I like this type of story personally. The final one is Winx Rock Band, once again tying into a merchandising section of the brand. Its issues Ghosts, Winx Band, and Red Devils. Winx Band is kind of what it says on the box, and Red Devils is sort of about Musa and Riven as Musa is trying to support another musician's career. Ghosts is the odd one out. It's about Musa meeting the musician and composer Sibelius, named for, Sibelius, and helping him come to terms with his grief. It's not really about bands. However, later, in Musa's enterprise, and as part of an ongoing plotline in the comics, Musa sets up a space for bands to come and rehearse with the help of Sibelius on his property. I feel like this would have been the better issue to put in this collection. Nevertheless, I will say I do love Ghosts. I've got these dreamy, nostalgic memories of reading it as a child, and I have been convinced that it had been a Pixie Mag story for some reason, so I didn't find it again for a long time. So I guess this is another way Rainbow could be putting out little arcs from the comics. I can see this working for maybe a compilation of the war in Heraklion, which is a very long plotline, but maybe key moments could be collated. I think maybe Aisha's love life would make a good volume. I would put the 2 Mission to Andor stories together, or Helios Sharpstone mess and his career as a tortured artist. This isn't a thing in the works or anything, but I think it could, work. A Rainbow. You have this big archive of Winx content which is completely new to a lot of people. Put it to use and more efficiently. And finally, let's talk about Fate the Winx saga. So as we know, Fate ended due to budget issues, and as much as Rainbow tried to fight for it, allegedly, and offer alternative ways of ending it, like only 3 episodes for season 3 or a film, reportedly, Netflix wasn't having any of it. Instead, the series is being picked up again as a graphic novel series. In my last Fate video, I had already discussed the potentials of a Fate comic series for rebuilding the reputation of the brand and potentially bringing it to new heights, and for giving closure to the show's fans after the cliffhanger of season 2. Mad Cave Studios, the parent company of Papercutz, has acquired the license for Winx. They've also acquired the license for Princess Guinevere and the Jewel Riders, which is exciting too, but that's not for this video. The project is under Maverick, which is Mad Cave Studios' young adult imprint, and the first volume is expected for summer this year. It's called Dark Destiny. The artist is Christiana Guionade-Gaudreau, and the text is by Olivia Quartero-Briggs. So the story is in completely new hands, which isn't really a problem given that Fate didn't seem to have an overall direction figured out yet. They were just taking it season by season. It will be interesting to see where Quartero-Briggs will take the story, where she sources her inspiration and direction. 2 volumes have been planned so far, and I somehow think that it is unlikely to get more than those projected 2 volumes, but this may be a good thing. I hope that they are working with that in mind and there will be a satisfactory ending within 2 volumes. It would be a shame to end up with another incomplete story, and on the other hand, new plotlines and arcs can be generated later if the graphic novel is successful. The more I think about it, the more I am genuinely excited for this graphic novel. I know that fans of Fate are unsatisfied with this consolation prize, and people who didn't like Fate don't care at all, but I am kind of optimistic. It's just kind of cool that someone new is taking over someone else's concept, and if nothing else, it will be fun to deconstruct their vision. Are Quartero-Briggs and Guionade-Gaudreau looking at the Winx Club for reference? Are they treating it completely as its own entity? Are they responding to fan criticisms and praises, or have they brought in a completely new concept? Brian Young seemed to hate Winx. It was evident in his interviews and the disdain expressed in the show for Winxy conventions. By comparison, this new team speak about Fate with genuine passion. Quartero-Briggs is quoted as saying, "It's extremely female-centric. These are powerful characters who are handling their business in their own way, and I think that's rare to see. What I love about this is the teachers are not in charge. These girls are really running the show, and they're complex. There are so many different nuances to their characters, and there's so much growth." I don't know if I agree with all of that, but the team's genuine excitement for the project bodes well. I know that people were underwhelmed by the art style, but the recolor of the cover, I don't know, it made a difference for me. The style may make it more accessible the more I think about it. Though I don't know if that counts as a genuine positive because it's not like I would be complaining if it had a more serious and closer to life style. For my part, I'm willing to wait and see the final thing. I found this panel from another project Guionade-Gaudreau has worked on, and it's very ligne claire, which is a style I really liked, pioneered by Hergé for Tintin. The more I see of their art, the more I am on board. I think it will give a kind of unique, identifying look to the project, and maybe that's what Fate needs for a revival. So overall, I'm excited, and I hope that other people are excited too. I've been going through a Fate renaissance recently, watching fan content from 2020, covering all the casting news, the initial excitement around it. I kind of miss that. Anyway, I think I've done enough free advertising for Rainbow today. There's something icky about talking about current products, at least in this context. The last thing I would like to mention before I end this very self-indulgent ramble is to do with artist crediting. As I've said before, there is a crediting issue with various international editions of the Winx comics, where the script writers and artists are not properly credited, if mentioned at all. The Viz Media Magic collection, for example, only lists its own editing team. Copies I have of the magazine in different languages are very inconsistent in crediting artists and writers, so as a consequence, the people behind these comics aren't always acknowledged in fan spaces either. I really don't think this is fans' fault. Fan archivists always do their best to gather all available information. If there is a lack of information, that means official channels haven't emphasized it. But I'm pleased to say there is one resource we can now rely on to go look up the artists and script writers. Tumblr user No White Dress on their blog, The Chaos Room, has published a master list of credits for issues of the Winx magazine that they own. I really hope you will check out the post and the blog, not in the least because this would have been quite an undertaking on No White Dress's behalf, but also because I feel that it is high time, especially as the comics are getting a revival, that we acknowledge the artists behind them. I don't really know what wiki protocol is like. If there are any wiki editors around here, they can perhaps let us know, but I think it would be great if we could get the names of the artists and writers onto the respective comic pages. Once again, I really want to emphasize that I do not think this omission is fans and archivists' fault, but I'm happy that now there is a resource in the form of No White Dress's post. So I think that's it for today. It's interesting that with the lack of main show content projected for, quite a while, the comics are getting a revival. As a fan of the comics, I'm happy about that, and I hope it's successful. And I'm looking forward to hearing your thoughts on the topic. So let me know if you're picking up any of the volumes, if you're interested in the Fate graphic novel, and also tell me if you hated this type of rambly video, or if you wouldn't mind it every now and then. I'll see you all very soon. Bye!